Happy New Year and welcome to our first NFI event 2021. Thanks to all of you, dear friends, for gathering today. We are ready to talk about recovery, how to refresh, reload, reboot, and restart the new year. In NFI, we are evolving and doing our own reboot and refresh as well. We find great joy in our work and we hope that you perceive it. Going digital, a topic for 2020, helped us to grow our global network faster and to live out our vision about bringing the Nordics together to boost global sustainable innovation. So all in all, COVID brought us closer. In 2020, we had more events than ever. eRoundtables, Fireside Chat, and we kicked off our first Connection Festival across 6 regions around the world. With all these activities, we have built trust among our members. And now we are ready for the next step. 2021 will be the year of cross-sector connections in NFI. The forums, fintech, retail, real estate, mobility, payment, big tech, insurance are the glue in NFI with the Sustainability Forum as the foundation. We begin today our first online event, and we hope that after a year full of activities, we can close 2021 by meeting in person in Lapland, Finland, for our NFI Summit in November. This year, we are also launching our Global Innovation Advisory Board with top-notch global leaders being our advisor, helping us to boost the global sustainable innovation. And my friends, together, we have all the ingredients needed to succeed. Today, we will enjoy a perfect example with combination of sectors, countries, and backgrounds that will bring light and inspiration to make the best out of this year ahead of us. And now, a warm welcome to our very own thought leader, chairman, and friend who will facilitate our event today. Chris Skinner, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Erin, and Happy New Year, everyone. And, you know, we had a obviously fairly terrible 2020 in most cases. In my case, actually, it was pretty good in that I did actually get to achieve some things that I didn't expect to achieve. I'll share those later in the year because at the moment, there's a big launch being planned for the springtime. And it may surprise you all. So maybe next NFI meeting, I'll announce what that is. But this NFI meeting, you know, it's reboot, renewal, refresh. And I think all of us have been through a major rethinking of our businesses during 2020 and how we reach not just our customers, but our other stakeholders, specifically our people working from home. And I ran 3 research programs during 2020. The first was in spring summer, which was looking at how the experts in fintech view the market's changes. The second was in the middle of summer, looking at how businesses were adjusting to the new normal and what that means to particularly financial and fintech companies. And the final one was at the end of year. And if you didn't see the results, I thought I'd just share the results of that survey with you. In that we had almost 400 respondents from mainly fintech and financial companies, but there are also consultants, technologists, and others involved. And most of them, half, are saying that the new normal is that digital is here to stay as an augmentation of physical. And so, for example, we talked about the idea of the Lapland Summit in November for NFI. That will be a physical meeting, but equally, we will be definitely augmenting all of our meetings with Zoom and video connectivity for those who can't make it to those events. And that's pretty much going to be across the board in all events companies. The other thing is that you know, two out of 5 people think things will never be the same again. And within the bank specifically, I think it was quite interesting that they had issues, you know, and the fact they admit to having issues is unusual. But, you know, staff working from home, the sudden change from 7,000, 10,000, 15,000 people in a big head office to no people in a head office was a major, major challenge. And that put stress on the technology structures that they operate. And over 2 in 5 had to permanently change their structures as a result. And 3 out of 10 said it massively changed their views. You can get this research for free from the link that I put on this slide. But for me, because I'm a technologist, so that's where I start, I think there were 3 major themes that came out of 2020 that in 2021 is all about now we have to do the reboot, renewal, and refresh. Because what happened in 2020 is a lot of companies became cloud-based. They've been talking about cloud for many, many years and had been prevaricating about making a decision to actually implement cloud structures in their operations. But when March hit and every employee was stuck at home, they signed the contracts. But what that actually meant is that they've moved to the cloud. They are now cloud-based in a lot of their core operations, but they're not cloud native, which is actually born on the cloud. When I was doing the case study for Digital Human about Ant Group and Alipay and Ant Financial, one thing that really struck me is I attended the conference they ran for their netrepreneurs. And the message was that no longer are things made in China or made in Indonesia or made in France or made in America. They're made on the internet. And I think that was the big thing about 2020, that we have to now be structured to be cloud native as though we were born on the internet, made on the internet, live in the cloud, not just move to the cloud. The second thing is that a lot of banks have been doing digital, which is obviously the theme of my last book. But doing digital is changing the bank. Being digital is actually renewing, refreshing, and rebooting the bank. Or in the case of an airline or retailer or any other organization, to do a complete refreshment and restart, to be born on the internet, living in the cloud. Cloud native, being digital. And digital transformation was a big theme last year, but to me, digital transformation has nothing to do with technology. It's actually much more around changing the culture of the company, the business model of the company, the thinking of the company, the products and services of the company, the whole structure and refreshment and renewal of the company. And I think that's what this year and onwards is all about. And finally, it was quite interesting in that we had a debate and Omni kept coming up, the omni-channel discussion. And those who know me know that I detest the word channel. It makes me physically ill, because to me, that's adding layers of things on the old core systems. It's channels on top of old systems and old structures and old business model. If you're going to refresh and renew and reboot, then you have to restart the company, beginning with digital at the core. And then that you provide access to that core service. And during the development of the report at the end of last year, we started playing with the idea that we should much more focus upon omni-access instead of omni-channel. Omni-access is saying there's a consistent service in the core delivery digitally at the core of the company across all of the ways in which people access physically and digitally. And to deliver that in 2021 and onwards is going to be a big challenge. So moving from being cloud-based to cloud native, moving from doing digital to being digital, moving from omni-channel to omni-access are all the major themes that I believe I would be focusing upon as a technologist and as a digital transformer in 2021 and beyond. I think we fixed the urgent needs in 2020. Now we need to implement the strategic needs. And that's what today's discussion is all about, I guess. So hopefully that introduction teased a few grey cells. What I'm going to do now is hand over to our panelists, if I can get my screen to stop sharing. Oh, this is typical. I have 2 screens here, and the one I'm looking at is not the one that says stop sharing. It's the other one. Technology, eh? I guess I'd like to hand over to Graham actually next, because I know you also have a few slides to share with us, Graham, and
Sure.
Maybe we can use these two discussions as a start point. So Graham, over to you.
Yeah, sure.
And
So,
also you need to introduce yourself, obviously.
yeah, indeed I will. So, hey, good afternoon to everybody. Great to be with you all. So I'm Graham Cross. I'm a chemist by origin. Grew up in the UK, Netherlands. I've lived in the Netherlands for the last 35 years or so. Long career in innovation and innovation management. Yeah? And there's lots of detail behind that I won't go into now in the interest of time. But great to be with you all. What I wanted to share with you, and I'll just share my screen for a moment. Here we go. Let's hope the technology is with us. If it's not, then I trust somebody will scream. Okay, so you should be seeing a slide. So that's me. I work, I have an activity that I call InnoSapiens. Work with Erasmus University in Rotterdam, the Rotterdam School of Management, and also the Ecosystem Thinking Institute, which is a little bit related to what I'm going to talk about. What I try and do, and this is me now, I want to bring people and organizations together to create balanced human and business value. Chris, you mentioned 2020, and I'll leave you to read this while I talk. But I think it's a really interesting year. It's a kind of year that really was a bit of a game changer, wasn't it? And somehow it doesn't feel like 2020 ended yet, even though we are already saying 2021. And yet, you know, with all of its tragedies, and they were certainly there, its sadness and suffering, it might just go down in history as a turning point for mankind. And what I'd like to put to you all is that's down to us. Whether it's a turning point or not depends very, very much on us. I saw things, and I've collected a few things here that I don't want to see. So I saw man-made materials reaching the very corners of life they were not designed for. And I don't think we should forget that. These things were never designed to end up in unborn babies, to end up poisoning children on the streets of London. And the EU saying 1 in 8 deaths are linked to pollution right now. And the weight of man-made materials is now greater than the biomass on the earth. I didn't check the number. How do you check it? But the fact that somebody would even say that is quite terrifying, isn't it? Now, here's something else I don't want to see. I don't want to see that climate change isn't really climate change anymore. It's complete environmental meltdown. So some snapshots here of climate change that don't represent it being a bit warmer in the summer. They represent it becoming too hot for humans, too hot for nature. That can't be something we want. Are we living creatures creating a planet that living creatures can't live on? That's an interesting thought, and perhaps a bit of a take-home message. When COVID hit, it hit people differently, depending on who they were and the level of privilege they have in life. And here's just a quick array of thoughts. Whilst some people were on the couch watching Netflix, saying all I have to do is stay on the couch and I'll save the planet, others had no choice, and they were in crowded underground trains going to the office anyway, because they simply have to. Whilst supermarket shelves were empty, those without money couldn't buy the products that were no longer on the shelves, leaving people sitting at windows saying, I need more beer. That's a bit tongue-in-cheek. The world's richest 1% caused double the CO2 emissions of the poorest 50. We've seen the metaphors, but they're real numbers. And we see it's also creating a generational issue. Children demanding from their parents that they can have a future. What does that say about society? And animals can't speak for themselves, but we can speak on their behalf. And we are observing the beginnings of mass extinction. So, you know, what are we going to do about these things? I think it's also very interesting to see how it's perhaps fair to say that the way firms are valued is becoming increasingly disconnected from mass human interests. Ego is dominating community. Here's just one random example. This is not me bashing any company in particular. I could choose 100. But on the same day that a clear path to 3 trillion was seen for Apple, it was also being accused of allowing suppliers to break Chinese labor laws. And some of its key suppliers were earning margins that were non-sustainable. So where is the we and the I in that equation? Hellish conditions at Amazon warehouses. We've all seen the articles, but has it really dawned on us what these articles are really telling us? Trust, an unbelievably important thing. And yet it was the breakdown in the perception of trust that has made it so difficult for apps to trace a virus. It's a kind of karma, right? What comes around goes around. You lose the trust, and then just when you need it, it's not there anymore. The images on the right show you that little heat map is the meltdown of an app called Signal, which is a messenger app. It happened last weekend. And why did it happen? Not because of Signal. It happened because WhatsApp was changing its policy on privacy, and people jumped so fast from one platform to the other that they crashed the entire system, especially for Marisol Muy Fragile. So I think it's really interesting to see how these things are now working. But now let's start being positive again, right? We've seen some downsides. We've seen some scary signals, but let's be really positive for a minute. You know, we can move mountains. Look how quickly we've put vaccines together. I read that we have electric car batteries that charge within 5 minutes. My old company, Unilever, trialing portable food factories, something we tried for decades, but now suddenly mysteriously can do. We can build bridges in a weekend on the motorways. On the right there, we can even make the Himalayas visible to people living in northern India. All we have to do is turn off the pollution for a while. We can do these things when we put our mind to it. And again, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, in the Netherlands 2 days ago, there was a strong rumor that there was going to be a curfew in the evenings. So people were online within minutes selling fake kits so you could run around in the evenings claiming to be someone delivering food. We can be very ingenious. I'm not saying it's good, but we can be very ingenious in that regard. We've learned an addiction called consumerism. Our growth model has been about consumerism. You won't have time to read that text. But I think one of the key learnings of the lockdown periods that we've gone through is that we've discovered that there are other ways of indulging. So noticing nature could be the greatest gift you can get from the lockdown. You know, it is time to, sorry, the slide just jumped again. Hang on, there we go. Maybe it is time to reinvent indulgence. I think that's quite a fundamental concept. If we don't reinvent indulgence, then we're going to be stuck in the same kind of spirals that we've been stuck in for a while now. Okay, and then to round off, you know, in Japan, when something is broken, you fix it with gold. So you treasure the past whilst repairing something for the future. We should do that. We have an opportunity to do that. We have a rich past. It isn't about throwing away the past. And on a hopeful note, to round off, you know, when I look at the next 12 months and beyond, I hopefully see that somehow vaccination is going to liberate us again. Chris, you mentioned people, you know, talking about which future they want. I've seen many reports where people are saying they actually don't want to go back to the past. They want to go forwards to a new future. I think that's something we can embrace. Bottom left, an aircraft left Washington yesterday, and I don't think there were many people who could resist a smile. Huh? And let's be honest about that. It's an optimistic moment. But I think what's really, really crucial looking forward, and this is going to impact every trend in markets, every trend in human behavior, every trend in consumerism, is the balance between me and we. If I put that on the first slide, we could have spent 20 minutes talking about the balance between me, the ego, and we, the community, and everything that's going on around us. If there's one thing that's become clear, it's that we need each other. And bottom right, then I promise to stop talking. Something that brought a tear to my eyes. So I was in a village in northern England about a year ago, driving around, and I needed to park the car for lunch. And I parked the car, there's a little sign saying, hey, donations for parking, please use the black box. You know what, when it says, when they encourage me to put £1 in the box voluntarily, I probably put 2 in the box. And why? Because there's a relationship between us immediately. There's trust. This is about human relationships and a non-transactional way of being together. And I think that's a really key part of the future that's ahead of us. So thank you for these few minutes, and back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Graham. I've got a few comments, and then we'll go to our next introduction. But first of all, I'll say that if you go around Scotland, they have this system called honesty bars, right, where you drink in the evening, but there's no one there from the management of the hotel. You just, right, if you're honest, you write down what you've consumed. Right. And exactly what you say, you're far more transparent when you're asked to be honest, yeah, than when you're not. I think a second comment is one of the projects I'm working on this year, which will interest you specifically, and it might interest some of the other speakers actually, is what I call purpose-driven finance.
Right.
And it's relating into ESG, sustainability, climate emergency, corporate social responsibility, but it goes further than that. It brings in inequality and inclusion. And I've actually got a whole range of people who are going to contribute to the book. From yesterday, I had an interview with the CEO of Discovery Bank in South Africa. I've got Gottfried Liebrand, who's the former CEO of Swift, contributing. I'm actually talking tomorrow with Tom Blomfield, the founder of Monzo, about what purpose means in finance and in the wider context. And the book will be called something like Digital for Good. And it's about how can technology be used to give back good to society and the planet, which I think is a really important thing. And there are some questions coming in that I can see in the chat room. I don't want to answer the questions now. I think I'll raise them when we get into the open Q&A. And if I don't finish them, I'll answer them personally directly to the individuals, just so you know. But please keep asking questions. I think I'd like to go to Bent after this, because I know that we are Nordic future innovations, so we need a Nordic view now. So over to you, Bent.
Okay, thank you. I have also prepared a few slides. I'm going to share with you now. And actually, what I have been preparing is pretty much the same issue, probably because I'm coming from the non-life insurance industry. And what we see is, of course, that climate change is huge. And we have had warnings about the consequences for the nature and the nature risk for 30 years. And actually what has been going on for the last 30 years, well, we have been consuming so much that it's not sustainable. So we had so many warnings, but still we just continue to act as if something, well, it doesn't really matter. And now, I mean, I'm really, really concerned about how are we going to change our behavior? Because if you look at the graph here, is that historically, the last 30 years, actually after the Norwegian Minister of Environment, Gro Harlem Brundtland, part of the United Nations for a better future. And after that, you know, the globalization started, I would say, around 1989, and we consume more and more. The good thing about it is, of course, that we have lifted so many people out of poverty. But
sorry, sorry, you are muted.
You've gone mute.
Sorry for the tech problems. Can you unmute?
can you hear me now?
No.
Okay.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Sorry about this.
Are they for recovery? So go ahead.
Well, all the good points has already been said. But my point is, if you look at the graph and how we are going to change behavior, because I think that's crucial if we're going to reach the environmental goals, and change management is the hardest thing if you look at corporate level. And there's so many books written about it. And now we're going to change how we perceive how we are supposed to consume for the whole world, you know. Because when you think about what we've been doing is actually producing waste. 30 years producing waste, polluting the environment, so it's actually not sustainable anymore. And on top of that, in particular in the Nordic region, we also see that we're not getting any happier either. You know, you can't buy your luck, and we're having huge challenges among younger in terms of psychological issues. And I think that's also relevant in the UK and other regions. So we need to change. And I want to discuss how are we going to manage to do that, because each and every one of us, we want to have well, materiality is supposed perceived to be equal to happiness. So that's the first thing. And then I believe it's hope. because for us within the European Union, there is a Green Deal. That is a fantastic work, in my opinion, which is a roadmap how we are going to reach the goals of zero emission by 2050. And the work, when you get into it, they're quite clever, I think, because they say it takes 25 years to change an industry. And if we are supposed to be at zero by 2050, we have to get started at latest by 2025. And that's not a long time ahead of us, but this gives me hope because they're also having a high focus on that the society should be fair, you know. And today, the development over the last 30 years has also increased the huge gap between the richest and the poorest. And it cannot continue like this because it's not good for society. So to Graham's, I don't know, yeah, not, you know, good for me, bad for the society, okay? So that is hugely important, I think, that we embrace the actions here, that the politicians continue to embrace it, and that we as consumers also start to act upon this. And as an insurance company, it's of course hugely important to understand what's going on because climate change will of course influence life, health and values. So if we continue living the way we do, we have to pay the bill. Soon in our region, which is lucky in so many ways, we will not pay the highest cost. It's actually going to be worse for those that's already having a lower standard of living. So in Norway, for instance, we are pretty fine unless the Gulf Stream stops coming up, because then we'll be living at the same like Greenland. So then it's gonna be not that nice living here. So it's huge and we need to understand it. And we have now integrated in Gjensidige, integrated sustainability as the foundation of our strategy. And we engage our employees now together with new ideas. How are we going to actually get better solutions for our customers? How are we going to help our customers going forward to understand the risk and reduce the risk of damage by actually mitigate it and do smart adjustments? So that's pretty much who we are. And what we realized as we started working more intensively with this is that if we're going to succeed, we definitely need to cooperate with our suppliers and the society, and of course engage our employees. That was my food for thoughts for this day's discussion. Thank you. Thank
you, Bent. And some of you may be wondering what order I'm doing this in that I'm going to come to Miko last, and there's a reason for that. What I'd like to do now is to talk to Zenon and then Sam, because Zenon Kaplan is in Singapore and has a very good Asian view, and Sam is in Florida, has a very good American view. Probably saw a jet flying over his head yesterday, as Graham pointed out. Zenon, maybe you could give us your view of how 2021 onwards looks from a refreshment perspective in Asia.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and great to be here. Just briefly on my background. So I, American by birth, studied computer science undergrad, worked for Citibank initially, and then moved to China in 2004. And I was in China for about 15 years, and then moved to Singapore a couple of years ago. So, I mean, over the time that I've been here in Asia, I've seen a true transformation. And some of the things that, Chris, you mentioned really at the beginning resonated with me. The first one was the idea of born digital. And when you think about born digital or digital first, it's a digitally native. It's typically in the context of companies. You know, these are companies that have started in the cloud and started with agile infrastructure. In Asia, it's actually the consumers that were digital first. If you look at PC ownership as a good example, PC ownership in the States would be about 85%. So meaning that 85% of households have some kind of computer in their household. In China, that number is less than 50%. Instead, people are using their smartphones. And so the availability of very cheap, fully functioning Android smartphones has led China and a lot of the rest of the region to be one of the largest adopters of smartphone technology. And so when we entered the pandemic last year, there were changes across the region, but they were with the non-digital natives. They were with the older generation. They were with the small, medium enterprises, the micro enterprises that have one or two people at a grocery store or a food store that were really suffering from everything that was happening in the pandemic. For the majority of people here in Singapore, which is a very kind of economically advanced society with really no financial inclusion challenges at all, it was pretty much the norm for a lot of people. Certainly some kids live at home, so they have to spend more time with their parents, which for a lot of them may complain, but they have the tools and the access here to be able to sustain themselves during a period that we saw in 2020. So, the region is very diverse, obviously, in Asia, when you look at from Japan down to New Zealand. And each of those countries have a different level of development and a different set of challenges that they faced over the course of this year. So if you look at some of the more developed countries, they were able to get around a lot of the restrictions in terms of, continuing the day-to-day lives. But then when you look at a place like Indonesia or the Philippines, the impact there was really tremendous. And so as we go forward in 2021, I mean, certainly there is optimism within the region, especially within, again, the developed countries where places like Singapore will have, fairly good control of the vaccines and get them rolled out in the first half. Whereas other countries are still struggling. A lot of 2020 meant digitization for companies and individuals. If you were a micro SME in Indonesia, your business model is typically not online. You would be an offline store, but all of a sudden you have to think about delivery. You have to think about ordering online. And so we've seen a mass digitization across all of these SMEs across Asia. We've also seen a lot of government support. I mean, Chris was mentioning this, and some of the previous speakers talked about the role of government in this. And really in particular places, I mean, we look at New Zealand as a really good example. I mean, New Zealand has done a very good job in containing the virus and limiting the economic impact. But then you have other countries, somewhat down to the politics, somewhat down to the people and the attitudes, like Australia, that people are struggling. Here in Singapore, I wasn't here for SARS many years ago. I came in 2004, so just after SARS hit in Asia. But it's very normal for people to wear masks here. And as we'll hear, Florida is kind of a different story, but people are committed to the collective good. And I think when we look at the future and we look at the sustainability of everything that's happening, that collective good is really a crucial element as we go forward. The other thing that Chris mentioned, just to wrap things up, is how things have changed. Things have changed, certainly, but there's a lot that will stay the same. In Singapore, there's a building called Lucky Plaza, and Lucky Plaza, Singapore has a large percentage of foreign workers. Myself, I'd be considered a foreign worker, but also manual laborers that come here for the construction, that come from India and other Southeast Asia countries to work in Singapore. These individuals typically on any weekend when they have their days off, typically on Sunday, would go to Lucky Plaza to remit money back to the Philippines, back to India, wherever they need to go. So on the weekends, it would be very crowded. Now, when Singapore went into its tightest lockdown at the very beginning in kind of March, April, Lucky Plaza was, nobody was there, completely deserted, because obviously people couldn't go out except for essential activities. We saw during that time, the data showed that a lot of payments moved online, a lot of cross-border remittances from Singapore. But an interesting thing happened once things started to open up again, is we started to see more footfall at Lucky Plaza. One of the things that we have to keep in mind, even if as we look at this digitization, is beneficiary preference. Whether it be in the case of humanitarian situations when we're deciding whether to give cash in an envelope or a card, or in the case of Lucky Plaza. As it turns out, many of the foreign workers that go to Lucky Plaza, it's more than just moving money. It's a social experience. They meet with their friends, they catch up on the latest news from their home countries, and they socialize. So although there are many things that will change, probably for us and many of our colleagues, there will be some things that stay the same. And it's important that although we look forward and we think about this digitization and where things are going, we also need to keep track of where things have been and where people want to be. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion.
Just before I switch to Sam Zenon, there's an observation that I personally seen, which is the countries that bestow on themselves the true essences of democratic freedom in the West have been much more severely affected than those that have a tight government control like Singapore and China. Do you have any thought on that in terms of going forward? Because we're already seeing China's economy is growing as fast as it did in 2019. And I think a lot of people will look at that and say, well, this is maybe the Chinese have given the West a poison that's stopping our economies and letting theirs rock and roll.
When I finished my MBA in 2004 and moved to China, as every recent MBA grad, I was capitalism, democracy. You know, the American side of me came in and said democracy and capitalism, and I thought many of the things that I saw in China at that time, and even when I left a couple of years ago, were very the antithesis of what we would expect in more democratic societies, and even here in Singapore as well. I mean, you look out on the street and there are clusters of surveillance cameras on many corners. I think one thing that this pandemic has exposed is some of the weaknesses in some of the institutions that we think of as being the end game. You know, many of us thought that capitalism was kind of the end game, and we've seen kind of the weaknesses in capitalism. Many people think that democracy is potentially the end game, and China needs to move to a democracy. I can tell you that a good corollary, and it's a case study that's used in multiple different areas, but India, China. India is a democracy, and their approach to the pandemic and the control of the pandemic has been lackluster. Whereas China, although China had a huge impact at the very beginning, using technology, using surveillance, using some of the tools that we might object to in fully democratic societies, enabled them to contain the virus. Similarly, here in Singapore, any building that you enter, you have to scan a QR code that's linked into a Bluetooth app on your phone that tracks you. That's a tracking mechanism. But the interesting thing in both of these markets is that people are willing to do that because of the collective good. And they understand they're willing to make those sacrifices for society to overcome these challenges and move forward, which I think is something that's very unique and an interesting corollary to what we've seen in some other nations where people are a little bit more entitled and feel like they need to express that by avoiding some of the common sense things like wearing masks and avoiding large groups.
And just to underscore what you just said before I come to Sam, I think what we're really seeing when I talk about reboot and renewal is the Asian economies and corporations and countries are moving at a much faster speed now than the European and American economies. So Sam, let's come to you because, as I say, you probably had an interesting day yesterday, and I don't want to get into the politics of the USA, but what I do want to get into is how America sees the future. So Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me follow, and what's happening in Singapore. So it was kind of, I did smile because the overall theme for this is reboot, renew, and refresh, and we're less than 24 hours from an inauguration here in the U.S. So without getting into politics, yay! How's that?
We should say, who are you, by the way, just to begin with, because I didn't introduce you properly.
Very happy American. I'm an executive on the Google Cloud team based in Jacksonville, Florida, so Northeast Florida. I'm only about a month in to this role with Google. My background is in fintech and banking. I was with a digital firm based out of London called 11FS, which Chris is on the board of. I've spent my career in banking and fintech. It's just an area I absolutely love and enjoy. So I thought it would be interesting, talking about the view from America a little bit, when we take that concept of reboot, renew, and refresh. The one term that comes to mind about what life is like in the US right now, going into 2021 is, the very rather famous quote, the future's here, it's just not evenly distributed. You could apply that to pretty much everything in the US. COVID is here. It wasn't evenly distributed. We've done an exceptional job of distributing COVID in the US. I live in Florida. Enough said. Everything you read about Florida is accurate. We'll just say that. So to give you an idea of what life was like in 2020, I'm going to take an example for myself. So again, I'm an executive at Google. So for me, to be blunt, life didn't change other than I don't get on planes anymore. but I sit in front of this screen and this office day in, day out. I would say the impact of COVID for me personally in my work life was Google gave me an allotment to buy a nicer desk because we were going to be working from home. Now flip that with the experience of my second oldest daughter. She graduated from nursing school last November. She has now spent her first year of nursing working COVID wards nonstop. Doesn't get the vaccine for another week, by the way. So you talk about not evenly distributed, and yet as an employee with Google, I get at-home COVID tests whenever I want. So the experience for the typical American coming out of this has not been consistent, and it is driving what you would expect: social unrest. It drives a massive wealth gap, which we've seen so many areas, especially within finance, that so many cracks have been revealed and accelerated because of COVID. I'll give you a good example of this. In the US, if you were to look at the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ or banks and their returns, as a matter of fact, they've done well. Bank of America's CEO yesterday on an earnings call said 2020 was a good year for Bank of America. And I immediately tweeted, read the room. Maybe not the greatest comment to make, in a situation like that. I understand the point he was trying to make, but overall the experience hasn't been great. We've had 10 million jobs lost. And if you talk about an uneven distribution, there was a shocking statistic that came out in December where basically women accounted for every single job loss in the US for that month, period. I mean, let that sink in. We lost a net total of 140,000 jobs in the US in December. And the Labor Department said essentially 156,000 of those were women. Men gained a net 16,000 jobs. And within that job loss, think about that, all women, the majority of that loss was for minority women in the US. And when you think about this, and I know we've got, an exec from Finnair who's going to be on talking about this, the industries that were impacted because of COVID, especially the hospitality and travel industries, which are primarily, those frontline folks are primarily young, they're women, lower income, that have seen a significant loss of jobs in the US, whereas other industries have, had a decent year, to be blunt. So that's a chief concern for me when we go into 2021, is how do we address that? How do we ensure, there's a term we talk about in fintech constantly, and Chris will smile when I say this, democratizing financial services, which, to be blunt, isn't about wealth management when you have no wealth. It makes me smile. We talk about PFM, so personal financial management, which is quite popular throughout Europe. Here in the US, it never really took off. I remember doing a study around personal financial management. There's a system called Mint, where basically you enter in all your information about your financial life, and it helps you build a picture of that. I remember interviewing a couple of college students on their use of Mint, and they said, yeah, it was great. I spent a day keying in all my information to find out I had no money. Politely, no shit. I knew that, thank you for wasting 24 hours of my life. So, if there's anything to reboot or renew and look at, it's how do we truly democratize and provide a safety net for individuals? That's core to what I try to do. We're talking about, financial inclusion, helping educate folks, provide them a safety net. Safety net from a U.S. perspective is a rather funny term. I'm talking to the Nordics, folks in Singapore. You can smile because, you've proven out systems that work. Here in the U.S., we've created a bit of a mess when it comes to this, to be blunt. So what I am incredibly looking forward to 2021, and again, never waste a good crisis, is how can we, as an industry, quickly learn how to mobilize incredibly quickly at scale and at an enterprise level, innovate and drive solutions out. Because to be blunt, this was an interesting mirror of how quickly we could move as a society on this, and we failed in 2020 as a country overall. Didn't do an excellent job of that. And we have so many other crises to face. We talked about global warming and the climate change, and the reality that science actually does matter, and math matters, and facts matter. So do I think we've gone through a little bit of a renewal with about 80 million people? Yes. With another 70 million, there's some work to do, and it's a lot that we're going to face. So am I encouraged about the new year? Yes, based upon what's taken place, for example, over the past couple of days. Am I still nervous, Chris? Incredibly so. So we'll see how 2021 plays out.
Just a quick question before I come to Miko. Do you think as a result of the pandemic in the USA that there's actually been a conscious switch to be far more digital amongst corporations and citizens? Because I've, in all my experience of the USA, found it a very old economy with checks and with a lot of paper administration structures and physical contact structures that, even in Europe, we've pretty much got rid of them.
Yeah, I think slowly, yes. Here's the one thing I'll say about Americans, and I'm generalizing, all right, but we have a nation that was founded on the concept of rebellion. So telling us what to do doesn't go over very well. You might have noticed that, even if it makes common sense. And I'm incredibly generalizing, everyone. But for example, I sincerely believe vaccines will help us immensely to be able to move forward. You address the virus, you address the pandemic, your economy can move forward. China's proven this. Other parts of the nation or the globe have proved this, and yet there's a sizable groundswell of folks that have no desire to have the vaccine. And tech companies, without naming them, did I tell everybody I work for Google? The tech companies have a responsibility when it comes to disinformation, when it comes to addressing situations like this. So yes, there has been a groundswell around digital banks in the US have done incredibly well. Chime has had excellent growth. Bank of America saw its excellent returns and growth it saw was primarily due to digital. Companies like Citi and Chase have done an excellent job. So yes, there is a shift that we've seen from the digital standpoint. It's definitely impacting banking. Yes, we still have a long way to go, Chris. Long way to go.
Yep. And in fact, it's quite interesting because I'm living here in Poland, and the Central Eastern European bloc in particular is very anti-vac because they think it's a government control system that's going to brainwash them. Miko, finally, I left you for last because the whole discussion has been around renewal or refresh and reboot. And being with an airline, it's the industry that I think has had the biggest negative impact in terms of revenues and growth and opportunity and hope. And yet you're pretty optimistic, or based on what I initially perceive of you, you're pretty optimistic. Tell us about your story.
Hey, thank you very much. And I have to say, first of all, hey, thank you for the introductions by my fellow, panelists and colleagues. Extremely powerful and impactful introductions. I really appreciate it. And thanks, when I got the invitation to come on and I saw the words of refresh, reboot, reload, innovation. I thought that these are all words that we at Finnair have, it's been daily themes that we've been working around. So my name is still Mikko Turtiainen, 21 years at Finnair, mainly in sales. I've been in Finland. I've been based in the US, in New York, 4.5 years. I've done a lot of business in Asia, especially in Japan and China, started up Shanghai. So I've enjoyed it so much. Through my career, I've faced, the Ashes, 9/11, SARS, many other, topics, but I still have not found the words to describe the previous 9 months. It's something that's completely out of any book, and the depth of this crisis is something that, Chris, I appreciate the words. Crisis is the only word that comes even close. Each and every airline, companies that are working in this industry are trying to find ways just to survive, to get to tomorrow, to get to that, that very, very known, that light at the end of the tunnel. Everyone is working just to see that light, to switch it on. And this is, there are two ways, you could stay still and, start to pout and go into depression, or you can try and be innovative and to create what do we need to do to get to tomorrow, to get through this crisis, get through this survival so we're strong when the industry does come back. And I'm very proud to say that Finnair has been in this kind of mode. What do we need to do to make extremely tough decisions along our 9-month path? We've had to make reductions and redundancies. We've had to find, ways to save in regards to costs. Very difficult time. But at the same time, we have had to reshape, reorganize, and rethink on what we're going to do. And in that sense, a couple of just examples on what we've done. Basically, we've had 350, 400 flights daily in normal times flying out of Helsinki and into Helsinki, carrying people throughout Finland and Europe and Asia. We were Europe's largest airline into Japan. We had up to 5 cities. Best kept secret, some would also say, in regards to how big we actually were as an airline from only 5 million people. But we had to really dig down and think innovation. So every single day in normal times, we had to make different kind of, foods for our business and economy passengers. All of a sudden, we're flying basically, just a handful of flights daily. But we did come up with an innovative idea, which I completely loved. And it was called the Taste of Finnair. So our kitchen, Finnair Kitchen, which made the meals for our flights, they started producing meals for supermarkets in Finland. So we had just a few menu items that we had. We had starters. We had roasted carrots with blue cheese mousse with a bit of hazelnut on top, being sold at 5.90 euros, per portion. We also had teriyaki beef with spring rolls and rice at 11.90 euros. And now we just came out with a bit more traditional Scandinavian food with meatballs and a bit of mashed potatoes at a very affordable, about 10 euros, a pop. And these have been selling extremely well. As soon as they got into the supermarket, we had Richard Quest from CNN calling the supermarkets in Finnair, "What are you guys doing out there?" BBC, Forbes. We had the Japan Times, where we didn't have anyone speaking Japan, answering the phone. It was incredible times, and it was really nice to to be able to get Finnair also to the thoughts of many travelers who are missing travel in a slightly different concept that they're used to. We also had, around Christmas time, we made 8 virtual flights from Helsinki to Rovaniemi. We did have a 10 euro cost for that, but all of that 10 euros we did donate to UNICEF for children who have been affected through the COVID. So trying to help them in some way. But the virtual flights, we had 8 of these, and they sold out full. A little secret, a virtual flight, we can take as many passengers on board that as there is no, kind of maximum capacity. But on that virtual flight, you sit in our new Airbus 350 business class. You get to see the northern lights, magical lights in which we are able to see during the winter times in the northern areas of the world. You were able to meet Santa Claus and give him his Christmas wishes or your holiday wishes. You were able to do a bucket list, jumping over the Arctic Circle. So able to give a half-hour, 30-minute experience that might trigger, maybe you want to visit that next winter and really do it, live. These were great kind of, aspects. Another area was refunds. If you think of the past 9 months, as airlines haven't been flying, one of the hottest topics for travelers has been how horrible airlines are in regards to refunding my money. I'm not getting my money back. All I'm getting is offers to get a voucher, but I want the actual money back in my bank account. And there have been airlines that were better at this, airlines that were worse at this. And we took the approach where we want the consumer, you make the choice. If you want the money, you'll get it in the span of about 2 months. We got the amount that we usually get in 3 years. Up until now, we've refunded over 400 million in euros. And our way has been, we just want to ensure that the consumer actually gets their money back. We don't want to force a voucher, as they would say, down your throat. We understand, if I was a consumer, I want my money. I don't know when I'll be able to, actually fly again. As with Marisol, we had a chat that it was back in March when she had her last flight. So refunds was something we put a lot of emphasis on. And some say that crisis is also an opportunity. We did come up with robotics. So robotics actually supported us in improving our refund process. So for the simplest type of refunds, if you have a flight from Helsinki to Stockholm and back, these type of flights we were able to refund through the robotics that we developed, which kind of does it automatically, doesn't require a manual service by someone typing in a certain command to make that refund happen. So it was kind of a thing that helped us develop our way of working, our processes, which at the end of the day do benefit the actual consumer. And just going forward, you know, this reloading and the refreshing of the environment, I think that we are in a time of disruption. There are so many questions in regards to when will capacity come back. So especially airline capacity, how much of the capacity will come back? Where will consumers want to buy? You know, how will sustainability play a role? Because I agree with all the discussion that has been today. I think, in my opinion, and Finnair opinion, is that sustainability will have even a stronger role in the upcoming years than it has had up until now. And I think this is something that, you know, just looking at the future, I have 3 kids of my own. I want them to have a beautiful world, you know, also as they're growing up, and all the different opportunities that, and even more that I've had. But you know, there are other areas such as what type of travel? Was it be to the, you know, the kind of very over or the heavy touristic destinations of the beautiful Londons and Romes and Parises, or will it be to the more areas where there's room to roam, the forests of Finland, where you can, you know, experience blueberry picking, which is, you know, something that every Finn does. But, you know, you talk to the Asians, you know, they love blueberry picking, something that never experienced. You know, you pick it from the ground and you can pop it right in your mouth and enjoy it. These type of experiences, which we experience daily and is kind of, we take it for granted, can actually be experiences that foreign cultures just want to have in this kind of new norm. So, I mean, I think that, you know, from the destinations to how they'll be, you know, how they'll be bought, how the whole health aspect will be looked at in the future. How digitalization in regards to, if you go to corporate travel, how much corporate travel will there be in the future? I think each and every survey out there is saying that minimum 20% less in the upcoming 3 years. Some are saying up to 60% less. So I mean, where will that end up? I do think that, you know, the virtual tools of the Zooms and the Teams meetings and so on, you know, it will affect it. I think there is still and will always be a need for that face-to-face, for, you know, us getting together and, you know, having a cup of coffee or some other kind of beverage and enjoying, you know, the Lapland the scenes or the scenes of New York or Singapore or Florida. I think these will be there, but I think it will be a different environment once it starts to normalize. But for anything to happen, I think it does require, you know, the vaccine to get certain coverage. I think, you know, countries have to look at their restrictions in a different way, and overall confidence and trust in travel, confidence and trust in the travel service providers that you choose, be it an airline or hotel, having confidence that they are taking, you know, the environment in regards to sustainability, but also into health and safety aspects in a serious way, and making sure that you can be seen in the services that they provide. I think these will be elevated in the consumer decision-making process going forward. But these are a few really quick topics that I could talk on for a day because I'm passionate about these. But I hope this opens some discussion and some thoughts from the travel industry, where we are hit deep. You know, to your comments, I think the travel industry is one of the worst 2 industries hit through the COVID. I was on a panel discussion with people from different industries, and I was saying, yeah, Finnair and the whole industry, how bad we're doing. 2020, we were making 2 million losses a day, and it's a really tough year for us, but for the whole industry. I had a guy from IT next to me saying at the same, you know, right after me, coming up and saying, yeah, well, we hit our targets by plus 200%. And I was thinking, wow, this world is really kind of, you know, talk about opposites, you know, left, right. I still can't, you know, explain it, but I think I, you know, kind of tried to leave the table, everything on the table, and get my thoughts out there, and I really hope this drives some discussion also regarding travel and our industry.
I'm going to do a reverse roundabout because we've only got about 20 minutes to deal with 1,000 questions, some great questions. But I think the point that we should start with, and I think all of you, I'd be interested in your views, starting with you, Mikko, is the future. You know, I mean, we've become very complacent about travel, globalization, interconnectivity of trade and countries. And when we talk about reboot, renewal, new normal, you know, are we going to go back to a globalization theme? I mean, globalization, to be honest, I think it broke down in the 2008 financial crisis. But but then it started to come back again into the radar at the end of the last decade. And I think the pandemic has probably shot it down in flames. What's the trend you see for the next 10 years?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I would say that if I was able to forecast this, I think I would be making some money on Wall Street. But I think that going to this point, I think travel will come back. I think it will be a different travel. One of my themes that I've been preaching for the past 8 months was that what was pre will not be post. So what was before COVID will not be after. I've been in discussions where travel industry members have been talking about, yes, once we get to normal, it'll be kind of like copy paste on what was before. And I was like, you cannot say that, because it will not be the same. Things will change, travel patterns will change, the need for travel will change, but it will be different. Going to some of the topics I mentioned in regards to, if you think of corporate travel, I think some external for example, meetings and cooperation will happen. But at the same time, there have been studies made that companies and purchasing organizations have said that they are more willing to make purchases up to £1 million through digital channels, not requiring face-to-face meetings anymore in the future. So I think there will be a change, but I think nothing really changes the need for that personal trust. I think that there are a lot of discussions out there, and how do you build trust between partners through digital channels, and I think that will also go forward. But I think that human beings, we do need that personal contact, and that will remain no matter, be it corporate travel, government travel, or individual personal travel. But I think that these questions, the next 12 months, will really be showing the direction that even how many airlines will be out there, how many airports will be served. I think this will also, to a degree, put some guidelines in regards to how that travel will look like in the future, and how that sustainability angle really kicks in.
Thank you. Sam, how do you think the globalization, connectivity, and supply chain is going to change over the next decade?
I think it's a fascinating topic. I really do. I think it's one that, wasn't it Bill Gates that said we overestimate the impact of technology, or overinflate the impact in everything in the short term over a 2 or 3 year period, and well underestimate the impact of a 10-year decade of technology and what's coming. So I think, if we were to forecast out to 2030, what our day-to-day lives will look like, I think that 10-year window is a good way to look at this, because, if we look back at 2010, while there was somewhat of a dependence on this form factor, now it's ridiculous, right? You talked about augmented, I believe, Chris, early on in that term, and we're all augmented to no end. Oh my God, my life is so sad. I've got an Apple iPhone and now a Pixel sitting over here. So I'm Android and iOS at this point, right? So I'm a little bit of a cyborg. And also, as we're doing this whole session, I've got 2 Macs going at the same time, because of course I'm multitasking as we do this. I do think one thing that will be interesting, Chris, that will change quickly and will impact the globalization standpoint. So I love what you said, right? This is made on the internet. So Apple with this iPhone, with the factories that are in China, with the need they have for parts being made, for example, in Vietnam, Mexico, the components of all of this to get it delivered and for consumption for, folks in the US is fascinating. I don't see that going anywhere. We will not be manufacturing this in the US. It's just not going to happen. So the need for that exists. But I do think that I love the example with Finnair. The advancements we'll see in AR, in VR, and how we collaborate, I think are going to be fascinating. The tools that we'll develop to be able to do things like this without getting on a plane. My whole life, Chris, yours is the same, right? We spend them on planes so that we can be in the same room and talk with people. I think over the next decade, that's really going to change. I can be in the same room with you. We would all be virtually in the same room with each other and be able to collaborate and do all that without getting on a plane. And yet I live in Jacksonville, Florida. What I wouldn't give to get on a plane and go to London or Warsaw and have a meal, because I can't do that virtually. Wine tasting virtually sucks. Absolutely sucks. But the experience of going to Warsaw and eating, or Frankfurt or London, I miss that terribly. If I eat at a Chili's or Applebee's one more time, I'm going to scream. So the experience component of that, I think, is going to be massive, and people desperately want to do that. But then that requires, how do you do passporting when it comes to COVID vaccines and whatever else comes up? I mean, there's so many different things to talk about. And how does that work cross-border? You know, the willingness to, you know, have a digital passport that I can use to show that vaccine, that I've been vaccinated and everything else. I think that's where this just gets fascinating. But no, I mean, I don't think we're ever going backwards for this, despite what some people might want to do.
Yeah, I mean, two quick comments, because Zenon mentioned it earlier, that when you travel around Asia, you have an app with a QR code that's green to show you're healthy. And green passports is already under discussion at length in Europe already. So, you know, the green passport is basically, I'm healthy. And then the second thing is, it shows you've only been with Google for a month. Throw away the iPhone, use the Pixel. There you go.
It takes very nice pictures. I'll say that much for it.
Yeah, it does. Zenon, you know, globalization, interconnectivity, supply chains, global trade over the next decade, what do you see happening?
Yeah, thanks for giving me a manageable topic for my couple minutes of speaking here. I think a lot of that resonated, what Sam was saying as well. I mean, for me, I would love to go to a Chili's, because we don't have Chili's here in Singapore, but you know, that is certainly a change. And I think the thing that struck me about the last year is how people's attitudes have changed and what is now acceptable. You know, doing my own company when I started out, I was based in a coffee bean in Shanghai. That was my office for the first year as I tried to get the business up and running. So I was very comfortable with the idea of working from home or working remotely, as is our team. But my wife, on the other hand, she's a journalist. She's a very traditional kind of go into the office type of person. We were just having a discussion today about if she wants to go back to the office. And she said, no, I don't want to go back to the office. I'm enjoying working from home. And I think that attitude, not just towards digital and, you know, the economy and how things are going to look in the future, but around personal preferences and how that's changed for, I think, all of us over the past year around that. So I find that really interesting. And I think that that element of things, again, it ties back to the example of Lucky Plaza, how much our personalities, our attitudes, and our focuses will change in the future, and how much they'll stay the same, how quickly revert. Because at the end of the day, humans are creatures of habit. And you know, as much as we say right now at the beginning of 2021 that everything's changing, everything's going to be different, we may get to November and December and we may have something new on the horizon that makes us forget that this ever happened, and it will be something in the history books. So that for me is really fascinating. In terms of Asia, you know, I think obviously China is starting to pull out of this. You know, many of the governments across the region have used this as an excuse to push digitalization. So we're seeing digital banks here in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Australia. You know, some are successful, some are not. Different topic of conversation there. But I think really what we're seeing around the digitization in general, but then specifically around finance, is quite compelling. And I, you know, and Chris, you've seen this, you've visited Ant as well, but I've always felt that Asia was leading in terms of fintech. And I think that will be only even more clear in the future when we see that Asia is leading it much more than just fintech itself.
Cool. Ben, obviously from an insurance perspective, you have a slightly different angle, but you know, do you see that the post-pandemic decade that's coming is going to be challenging for you? What are going to be the key challenges and opportunities?
I think actually there's so many opportunities, in particular for us where we are located, because there's so many business opportunities, you know. And if you think about what insurance is about, it's actually to help people avoid their risks, you know. And we take a premium, and if the perception is that there is likely to be more claims, we can have a higher premium. So in the short term, it's actually a business opportunity for us. But of course, we need to be very good at using our data to price the risk correctly. But I think the biggest challenge, and which is very hard to see now, is actually consumption. How are we going to consume going forward? And are we going to be able to handle the huge challenges related to nature, such as the example from Graham, microplastic? I know that the PSI, Principle for Sustainable Insurance, they now trying to get a better understanding of their long-term consequences for health related to micro and nanoplastic. I mean, there's so many issues around nature risk that has been put in the shadow related to the climate risk, but it's actually, in fact, nature risk that's scaring me. And we just had a huge slide here in just a little bit north of Oslo during this Christmas time. Lots of people lost their houses. And there's so many things that's going to happen I would say, within the next decade, that I don't think we are able to understand it, but it will be changes, I'm sure, with also because we have lots of data, and we have to share data to be better prepared for the future. And I think people in general will change, but it's hard. But there was one thing that I found very interesting, just read in the newspaper. As a result of the net shopping, everybody sitting home, it's so easy to do the shopping as you're having a break from your Excel spreadsheets or whatever. So there were no more containers in the Asia because they're all up in the western parts of the world. That gives a picture that we're shopping, we're having good fun, sitting home, waiting for the pandemic to fade out. So, and that's not good for the climate, it's not good for the environment. So, yeah, but I hope that the younger generation will push the older ones to the right direction. So I'm pretty optimistic, but for the insurance industry in the short terms, I think it's business as usual, just putting the right price on the risk, and we're going to thrive in a way. Yeah, that's my perspective.
Just a quick question on the climate piece, because for 9-10 months the planet has paused in terms of business and travel and everything around connectivity. We've all been locked down at home, and I think a lot of people think that that's kind of reset the planet, and I think we definitely have the opportunity to reset the planet.
Absolutely,
but I think there's maybe a complacency that the lockdown has given the planet the opportunity to breathe, and we haven't really used that opportunity.
But there is one thing that I think hasn't been too much communicated. And actually, if you look at the total CO2 emissions, they're generated mostly from generating electricity. And it's a huge debate around air travel, but that's just 5% of global emissions. Yeah. And nobody talks about the total emissions related to all the huge computer stations, running. I read a note that just generating blockchain is equal the energy consumption as Denmark. That's just so energy consumption hasn't declined through the pandemic. That's the biggest source. There's still being opening new coal mines. And we are, of course, in Norway, we make a profit on oil, though we see that it's probably a declining business, but still, it hasn't changed the way how we generate electricity. And that is the key, I think. So, yeah, how are we going?
More solar panels.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, something that strikes me, you were talking about what I see changing a bit in globalization and everything else from a US perspective. Not that this hasn't been the case, maybe behind the scenes, but what's really happening in the US is fascinating, is the incredible power that individual companies have in impacting change. So the social unrest that's happened in the US and the stance that a lot of organizations have taken on that, for example, funding certain politicians or views and withdrawing funds for them as a weapon is interesting. The same and the stance that a lot of companies, such as mine at Google, have taken when you talk about the environment, right? And the impact from the private sector. You know, we can debate Elon Musk all day long. That would probably take a year just to debate him. But the impact that Tesla's had, I grew up in Detroit, forcing Ford and GM and other companies to actually take, you know, the environment seriously in producing new vehicles, right? And in driving that. So the impact that organizations have had outside of politics, the power shift that we've seen, and again, behind the scenes, I'm sure it was always there because of funding for all that. But now, you know, the general public seeing the impact that they can have to drive either social change or economic change or policy changes. That's one thing that's continuing to grow here. You know, there's no reason, example, in the US, Jamie Dimon to run for office because he's a de facto voice and leader in the role that he has.
Cool. I'm aware of time restrictions, and Graham, I want to give you a few words to finish that question around globalization, and then I've got one last quick round robin to finish with. So Graham.
Just quickly on globalization, I mean, a couple of things for me then. One I would say is that if we think about the old model of globalization, it was based on the notion of economy of scale, right? One of the key drivers was to drive for economy of scale. But I mean, if the benefits of that economy of scale were not going back into society in an equitable way, then maybe it's fair to challenge the merits of that model the way it was. And if I now look at the way the world is changing, then, you know, there are more borders closing than opening right now. There is geopolitical tension, which represents risks for global organizations and supply chains. Savvy consumers want personal products, not products coming out of one factory, all identical from one place in the world. So all of that is changing. And I actually don't think, I think many of the global models, you know, shipping a bottle of water from one side of the planet to another for somebody to drink was only economically possible because the manufacturer wasn't paying the real cost of it to the world. They were paying a fraction of the cost and not the whole cost. So I would say that some sort of smart local can be conceived, and it's going to win. I think it's a real chance of being the winner.
Yeah.
And then one other very quick point, and I think it's just, I'll just say it quickly and then I'm done there, Chris, is the this notion of ecosystems. I think it's really interesting. We hear the phrase ecosystems all the time. We kind of half know what we mean, but not quite. That's okay. But I think there's an interesting thought that if constellations of smaller organizations working together can become very powerful levers of change and deliverers of innovation and change, then the fact that they represent lots of smaller organizations makes it more equitable, more democratized, and more spread than large corporations. And it actually has got inherent diversity. So I think it's a really, really interesting thought that if those ecosystems can latch on to some of the enduring needs that are currently being served by others, and meet them in a better way, then they can actually go ahead and win the game. And of course, many of the current ways of serving enduring needs have been interrupted by COVID and are going to be interrupted by environmental needs. So there is a burning platform that everybody can address and try and come with a better way. Back to you.
Cool. I've got one last question. Just before I ask the question, I want to make sure that everyone knows that all the questions that the audience has been raising, Marisol, if you can get those to the panel and to me, if any of us have a thought or comment, we get them back to Marisol and you could share that with the audience, because I'm conscious that we didn't have time to go through all the questions that were being raised. But I just want to go back around the panel the other way and ask each of you to just, in a very short sentence, give me the one thing you've learnt as a result of the pandemic and the opportunity that's giving you for the future. And unfortunately, Graham, you're the first guy in my science studio in there.
Straight off the bat, work has a professional content-based dimension to it, but also a social dimension to it. Being cut off from the social dimension has probably set people into a place of rethinking what they want to do in the future.
And Ben?
I'm thinking actually about a comment from my daughter. And she said, for those who has no friends, they are in deep shit now. I think the psychological aspect has been deeply underestimated through the pandemic. We are social creatures and we need to socialize. And the consequences for those being uh, probably also part of the social media, it's like you so many lonely people out there that's having had a awful time. So I think the social part is the biggest learning. I think that we need to find another way to take care of those who's, say, children living in families with not the best conditions for thriving and growing up. So that's my biggest learning point and concerns starting out in 2021.
Yeah, I think I'll back you up on that and just say that, one of mine is that work is actually secondary to family and friends, but you don't realize that when you're working flat out and not thinking. Zenon.
Yeah, I think along those same lines, it's made. I kind of went through personally the first few months and said, okay, this is nothing. But I think the psychological impact of everything that's happened is really incredible and underestimated. I guess my word, if I had one word to sum it up, is resilience, both in terms of personal and business. The ability to, whatever the situation is, and I say this from a relatively good place because I haven't been tremendously impacted, but a lot of friends and family, both back in the States and otherwhere around the world, have been hit by this. In worst case, people passing away because of everything that's happened. But that resilience and whatever the situation provides to try and get going again, whether that be personally or business, but understanding that things will be in a constant state of flux and we're just going to have to deal with what comes to us.
Sam?
The incredible responsibility that technology companies have, incredible technology responsibility they have. And we've all talked about it. We're social creatures. When you're in a pandemic or something like this and you're stuck trying to have a social life on just digital channels, it leads to all kind of issues, politically, socially, you take your pick. And there's an incredible amount of responsibility, therefore, for the companies that provide those tools. And we haven't even talked about AI. We haven't even talked about some of the other aspects of that. So there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that can come from that. So we have to be incredibly focused and transparent and talk about that.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking more about that later in the year, and hopefully you guys can come and join us in that planned, because I wrote something the other day about money's not about jars and pots. And someone said to me, no, it's AI to manage your jars and pots. You shouldn't have to be doing it, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Miko.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take the corporate approach and not go on the personal side, but I would sum it up in a sentence by saying that challenge yourself honestly and don't be your business's own worst enemy to change. And I could go on change management for a long time. And if we didn't challenge ourselves, we wouldn't have the virtual flights. We wouldn't have the taste of thin air, in the supermarkets and so on. So to the point of resilience, you have to honestly challenge yourself and not be the one saying that, oh, we can't do this because it's not possible. Nelson Mandela said that it's impossible until it's done.
Be the change you want to be.
Exactly.
What a fantastic conversation, guys. I really appreciate your time and your contribution and your input and support. I think it was a real eye-opener in terms of making us think a little bit more about where we are and where we're going and where we've come from. So fantastic conversation. I'll hand back now to Iron and Marisol because we have some future meetings coming up. And I think our next meeting is the end of March. Is that right, Iron?
Yes, well, we will have, sorry, I will take it for Irene.
Hello, Iron.
I'm the new Irene. I'm Marisol Menendez, just for those who don't know me. And we have a full year, a year full of activities. both looking into specific sectors. We are really now actively, intensively in finance, retail, real estate, of course, sustainability, which is like the connection among all the sectors, big tech, and all the powerful and interesting industries in the Nordics, following this mission about bringing everybody together, but also building international bridges. That's why today's meeting was such an interesting aspect. So we will be keeping everybody informed for the specific meetings, and the next intersectorial session will be in March, as you said, Chris. And we're looking forward meeting again in person, but in the meantime, we are here connected with the Zoom. Thank you, everybody. Really, I want to, if anyone wants to activate the camera just to say hi and connect us socially. Irene, do you want to add anything?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
I would like to say thank you to everyone. I have this cold that I'm not there, but it's been fantastic. It's been the way we're talking about recovery, reboot, and changes. It's really have done something good to us. And we're talking about friendship, resilience, and I'm really looking forward to continue with a lot of fantastic discussion through the year. And it's been a fantastic day. I really feel a lot of energy now listening to all of you. There's been a lot of questions. So just, we are going to keep up the good work. I'm really looking forward to see you again March 31st. Thank you all, and give each other a big applause from Singapore, US, and Nordic. Good to see you guys. Chris, thank you. You're the boss.
The attendees can activate the camera and we can see each other and say hi from all around the world. People, thank you very much for today. Hello, everyone. This was an interesting beginning of the year.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye. Take care.
Bye. Thank you, Ben.
Bye.